All right, so let's dive into Trump on Rogan. Did not see that one coming.
Yeah, pretty unexpected, right? I mean, this is Joe Rogan we're talking about, the same Joe Rogan who once called Trump an existential threat to democracy.
Yeah. And now here he is with Trump,
Yeah.
chatting away for 3 hours, like old pals almost.
What's interesting to me is that this could signal like a shift in Trump's campaign strategy.
Sure.
Rogan's podcast has crazy reach, especially with younger male voters. We're talking millions of followers.
And Spotify.
Yeah, Spotify, YouTube, you name it. And these are voters that don't always pay attention to the, typical news channels.
Usual suspects.
Exactly. So it seems like Trump is going directly to them.
Cutting out the middleman.
Exactly.
And just to underline how important this interview was to Trump, remember how he was like hours late to that rally in Michigan? Because he was recording with Rogan?
Wow.
He was willing to risk upsetting his base for the chance to connect with this whole new audience?
Yeah, and it really shows how important he sees this demographic. It speaks to a willingness to adapt to like a changing media landscape. But the question is, what did we actually learn from this 3-hour conversation? What does it tell us about Trump's thinking?
Yeah, like what's he trying to do here?
Exactly.
Well, one of the biggest things that stuck with me was when Trump talked about his biggest mistake during his presidency. He didn't blame a policy or like a specific event. He blamed it on picking the wrong people
Interesting.
for key positions.
Yeah, and he didn't hold back on naming names either. He called out John Kelly, his former chief of staff, and John Bolton, his former national security advisor, using some pretty harsh language.
Yeah, he did not mince words.
Not at all. This whole blame game is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it lets him avoid taking responsibility for any perceived failures.
Yeah, like passing the buck.
Yeah, exactly. It also reinforces this idea that he's not a typical politician.
Not bound by conventions.
Exactly.
So it's like he's saying I had the right vision, but I was let down by the people around me. And that narrative could resonate with some voters.
Ah.
Especially those who are disillusioned with the establishment.
Oh, absolutely. They're looking for someone who'll shake things up.
An outsider.
Exactly. He's a disruptor. And by focusing on personnel, he's shifting the blame away from his own judgment and onto others.
That's clever. Deflecting criticism while still seeming accountable.
Yeah.
And speaking of accountability, Trump also talked about North Korea. Remember how that all started with some pretty aggressive rhetoric? The whole little rocket man thing?
Right.
But on Rogan's show, he paints this like totally different picture. He talked about developing a rapport with Kim Jong-un and even claimed he advised him to focus on like building beach resorts.
Instead of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, it's quite a contrast from, Fire and Fury.
Yeah, a few years ago.
Do you think this is a genuine change of heart? Or is this just a calculated move to soften his image?
It's tough to say for sure, but it's clear he's trying to show himself as a leader who can be both tough and diplomatic,
Someone who can stand up to adversaries.
but also find common ground.
It's a balancing act he's been doing his whole career.
Yeah,
And it seems to be a key part of his appeal.
absolutely.
It makes him seem unpredictable.
In a way that can be seen as a strength.
Yeah, you don't always know what to expect from him.
Exactly. And that keeps people guessing. But that unpredictability, it can be both intriguing and concerning.
Right. It all depends on your perspective.
It's part of what makes him so polarizing.
Then there's the issue of Ukraine. Trump stated very plainly that Putin wouldn't have invaded if he were still president. He even hinted at having some secret leverage over Putin, though he didn't go into specifics.
That's a bold claim, especially with all those accusations of Trump being too friendly with autocrats during his presidency.
Yeah.
But he's insisting that he had a strong relationship with Putin and that he could have prevented the war. Is this true? Or is it strategic posturing?
For this particular audience.
Yeah, it's a question worth pondering.
It's definitely a statement that will resonate with those who believe in Trump's ability to command respect on the world stage. But it's also likely to fuel criticism from those who see him as reckless and unpredictable.
Especially with his foreign policy.
Exactly.
Right? It plays into both his strengths and his weaknesses.
As perceived by different groups.
Exactly. It reinforces this image of a strong leader.
Who's not afraid to deal with difficult characters.
But it also raises concerns about his judgment.
Yep.
And his potential to escalate conflicts.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
It is. And of course, we can't talk about Trump without talking about the 2020 election. On Rogan's show, he kept insisting that the election was stolen, even though he doesn't really have any evidence. He even said he's got these incriminating papers that he's going to reveal at some point.
Interesting that he's still sticking to this narrative.
Yeah.
Even on Rogan's show, which is known for, challenging norms, open discussion. You'd think he might soften his stance a little, try to appeal to a wider audience.
It's definitely a gamble. On the one hand, it energizes his base. They see him as a fighter, someone who's battling a rigged system. But on the other hand, it alienates people who want to see evidence, who believe in democratic principles.
Yeah.
It's a tough spot, trying to broaden his appeal while sticking to his core message.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Exactly.
And then there are his attacks on his opponents and his praise for certain allies. He had some harsh words for Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom, but he was full of praise for Elon Musk and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., even suggesting Kennedy as a potential cabinet member.
It seems like he's trying to align himself with figures who are popular with Rogan's listeners.
Yeah, like he's tailoring his message for this specific audience.
It's a smart move strategically, echoing the sentiments of this demographic, trying to create a connection.
It's like he's saying, I'm one of you. I get you.
Exactly. And that can be really powerful, especially for younger voters who often feel disconnected from politics.
Yeah, they don't see themselves represented.
Right.
And then things took a bit of a turn. Trump and Rogan spent a chunk of time talking about extraterrestrial life. Trump said he's open to the possibility. He even mentioned reports of jet pilots seeing strange things.
I love that.
Quite a departure.
Yeah, a fascinating detour, and probably a strategic one. Rogan is known for his interest in UFOs and the paranormal.
Right.
So, by engaging in this conversation, Trump might have come across as more open-minded.
More relatable.
Exactly.
It definitely humanizes him.
Makes him seem less intimidating.
Yeah, more accessible.
And that's a key part of his appeal. He's able to be both powerful and down to earth.
The guy who can command a boardroom
Yeah.
and then chat about aliens.
Yeah, it's a fascinating juxtaposition.
And speaking of juxtapositions, Trump brought up his days on The Apprentice,
Oh, yeah.
claiming that NBC executives begged him not to run for president.
Because they wanted to keep him on the show.
They didn't want to lose him.
It's interesting. This anecdote serves a couple of purposes.
Like what?
Well, first, it reinforces this idea that he's not a typical politician. He came from a world of success and celebrity.
He didn't need to seek power.
Exactly.
It was a sacrifice
Right, like he gave up something great to serve his country.
out of a sense of duty.
Not personal ambition.
Right.
And secondly, it reminds viewers of a time when he was seen as an entertainer.
A charismatic figure
Someone who brought people together.
through competition and spectacle. It's like he's trying to remind people of a time when he wasn't so polarizing.
Yeah.
When he was more of a unifying figure.
It could be a way to connect with people who are disillusioned with his political persona.
And then, of course, no conversation about Trump is complete without mentioning his health.
Of course.
He made sure to mention his unbelievable stamina during a recent treadmill test, though he didn't give us any details.
This is a theme with him, emphasizing his physical strength and vitality,
Countering concerns about his age
and fitness for office.
without actually providing any evidence.
Right.
It plays into this image of a strong, energetic leader.
Who's up to the demands of the job.
But it also raises questions about transparency. Is he willing to be open about his health records?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's a calculated move, for sure, relying on his own word, rather than, external validation.
Right.
It's worked for him before, but will it keep working? That's the question.
So we've really dissected this interview.
Hmm.
What are your big takeaways? What does this tell us about Trump's campaign strategy and his efforts to connect with voters, especially younger voters who might be hearing him on Rogan for the first time?
Well, one thing that's clear is his willingness to go beyond traditional media, appearing on Rogan's podcast. It's a direct attempt to reach a younger audience, people who get their news online and might not be watching, CNN or Fox News.
Yeah, he's meeting them where they are,
Exactly, and having conversations that are relevant to them.
not just talking at them, but talking with them.
Right. It's about building trust.
It seems like he's also trying to show a more relatable side of himself, talking about aliens, reminiscing about The Apprentice, emphasizing his stamina. It's like he's trying to connect with listeners on a personal level,
Yeah, showing that he's more than just a politician, that he's a real person.
with interests and experiences that people can relate to.
Exactly, and that's important, especially these days, when authenticity is so important.
But at the same time, he's not backing down from his core message. He's still talking about a stolen election, attacking his opponents, praising controversial figures. It's like he's trying to walk this line between appealing to a wider audience and staying true to his base.
It's a tough balancing act. Can he pull it off? Time will tell.
So the big question is this a successful adaptation to a changing media landscape? Is he successfully rebranding himself? Or is this just classic Trump, unconventional and polarizing?
We'll have to wait and see. But this interview definitely got people talking, and that's important in politics.
It gives us a lot to think about. As we head into this election cycle, the rules of the game are always changing.
And those who can adapt have the best chance of winning.
As always, we encourage you to check out the full interview for yourself. Consider the different perspectives and come to your own conclusions. That's what the deep dive is all about, giving you the tools to navigate this crazy world.
And make sense of it all.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.